Andrew Brown's print shop smelled of ink and grease and the sweat of muscular apprentices carrying trays of lead type from the composing table to the printing press. When I was a child, Mr. Brown let me pick out the letters and set them in form. It had been a thrill seeing my words in print. The printer issued no invitation to me that morning. He was deep in conversation with Mr. Karras as we entered. "What's news, William?" Mr. Brown asked. "Pack your bags for a trip to the country?" He wiped his hands on the apron and sent an apprentice for a bucket of ale. Grandfather banged his cane on the floor. "I didn't run from the redcoats, and I won't run now from a dockside miasma. What is wrong with people, Andrew? We suffered all kinds of disease in our youth, but folk were sensible. They didn't squall like children and hide in the woods." Mr. Karras cleared his throat. "If the yellow fever were a soldier, you'd run it through your famous sword and sit it down to a hearty dinner. But there may be cause for caution, old friend. Listen to the mayor's orders, which Andrew has just printed." He picked up a broadsheet and read, "On advance from the College of Physicians. All persons should avoid that are infected. The homes of the sick should be marked. Sick people should be placed in the center of large, airy rooms without curtains and should be kept clean. We must supply a hospital for the poor. All bell tollings should cease immediately. The dead should be buried privately. The streets and wharves must be kept clean. All persons should avoid fatigue of the body and mind. All persons should avoid the sun, draughts, and evening air. All persons should dress appropriately for the weather. All persons should consume alcohol in moderation." "I'm glad they'll stop ringing the bells," I said. "Sensible advice, most of it," Grandfather said. "Still, I don't understand why so many run scared." "They've been taking over Ricketts Circus buildings on 12th Street to house the poor," said Mr. Brown. "Isn't that why we have an almshouse?" asked Grandfather. "The almshouse is closed. They want to protect their residents from the disease. So the fever victims lie on the floor of Ricketts with little water and no care. Once a day they remove the bodies for burial. A neighbor threatened to burn the place down if the sick are not removed," explained Mr. Karras. "But where will they go?" asked Grandfather. "No one knows." I hadn't heard about that. They were burying fever victims every day. "How many have died, Mr. Karras?" I asked. He turned to Mr. Brown. "How many dead, Andrew?" Mr. Brown shrugged. "It's hard to say with certainty. I've heard several hundred, at least," said Mr. Karras. Grandfather paused. "Even a few hundred isn't enough to call it an epidemic," he said. "Some doctors warn we may see thousands dead before it's over. There are 40,000 people living in Philadelphia, William. Can you imagine if 1 in 40 were to die?" The room quieted as we pondered the number. "I don't believe it," Grandfather said finally. "People exaggerate.